Howdy, I'm your Mad Philosopher in residence, and this is just another friendly argument. Today, I'm having an open and unrehearsed conversation with James. Can you tell the listeners what our relationship is, James?
Uh, I kind of forgot how I met you. Actually, that's not true. We met each other in college. I was the best man at your wedding. You were the groomsman at my wedding. And at my wedding, it has kind of spiraled into an out of control social circle.
That seems to describe it pretty well. So it's a stupid question, but I have to ask for the sake of context. What do you do?
That is a stupid question. Yes, thank you for bringing that up. I am an electrician, and
Okay.
yeah,
There you go. So you run wires through buildings and stuff. Is it commercial or residential?
I do both actually.
There you go.
They bounce me around.
That's good. It gets a little bit of everything. So more important than what you do, though, is what you are philosophically or politically.
I guess politically, libertarian, philosophically, I'm a devout Catholic, and yeah, devout Catholic. I like theology a lot, which I know opposes you and your ontology, and that has led to many interesting conversations in our time.
I don't mind theology, but theologians tend to get mad at me when I start discussing theological matters.
No, theology.
Oh,
I don't like
yeah.
teleology, not theology. Theology annoys me too. Well, actually, that's not true. I like theology. I don't like people who study theology because they are wrong.
Agreed.
In a very visceral sense. But that is not what we're talking about today.
No, not today. So with that, we wander off of my tiny list of questions and into uncharted territory. That uncharted territory, to my knowledge, seems to be a discussion about contracts and the non-aggression principle brought on by my previous blog post. There will be a link in the show notes afterwards. So listeners can go ahead and read that on their own time. So, James, non-aggression principle and contracts.
Yeah.
How would you like to start this discussion?
Okay, well, I guess your blog post originated from a question that I had, which is, would a contract violate the non-aggression principle? Would enforcing the contract be a violation of the non-aggression principle? I read your blog post, and it seems that you're leaning towards that yes, or your standard answer is contracts are bullshit. And when you first told me that, I'm like, wow, you like really hate agreements, apparently. And you're said that you're going to be writing about ontology contracts in the future. And how I held contracts was basically an agreement that was explicitated to, agreement that is written down and terms known by all parties and agreed upon.
Yeah. As a general rule, I think we're in large agreement as to what exactly contracts are. I think the underlying ontology is where we're going to have the biggest issues, which if listeners to the previous discussion about water rights would see that a lot of it comes down to ontology as well. The blog post that I have most actively written right now is, of course, about ontology. So we'll get into that later on the blog. But as far as I can understand, what a contract really is it's you have a pre-existing agreement between individuals where it's like, oh, this is the thing we should agree on. And then you negotiate that agreement between two people or two parties or multiple parties. And then after that, you write down that explication of the agreement in a way that everybody assents to, using common language and terminology. That's usually the legalism of the contract. Yes. At which point people sign it as just an indicator that, yes, this is what I agree to. And then at the end of the day, it's ultimately a matter of whether somebody upholds that agreement or not. So I think right there, that little description we have is the same between the two of us.
Yeah, it's pretty solid.
So our point of departure then is a question of ontology, where I'm going to say a contract is bullshit, which to me is an ontological term. It means it's a fairy tale that we construct around observable phenomena.
Well, I would disagree with where you think our disagreement is, because contracts, they exist, and they exist. People sign contracts. We know that they sign contracts. We know that agreements exist. I don't think that's any problem between the two of us. If you're going to say that the ontology of a contract, no. Like, I think the problem is non-aggression principle. That, what does that mean, non-aggression, rather than what does a contract mean? What is the nature of a contract?
That sounds fair to me. We can bracket ontology for now and move on to the non-aggression principle, and we'll see where that leads.
Oh, yeah, sure. If that's how you want to do this is your house, so to speak. I'm not there, but yeah.
Yeah. In that case, so do you want to define aggression and then have me try to correct it, or do you want me to define aggression and then have you try to correct it?
Okay, well, I'm already familiar with your ideas with contracts, and it's in the blog post, and anyone could read about it. So I like to put forth my three kind of arguments not against your blog post, but in favor of saying contracts don't violate the non-aggression principle.
Okay.
And then we'll go from there.
Sounds great.
The first argument is aggression cannot exist if there's consent. That if you could say to your wife, hey, punch me in the face, and that's what you're into. Well, and she punches you in the face, I will not call that an aggressive act because you're inviting it. Agreeing to a contract is giving consent to a future action, and that's a minor premise. Therefore, the action fulfilling a contract is not aggression. That's the basics of my first argument.
Okay.
And we can get into that in a little bit. Second one is, my second argument is that holding on to property, knowing that is not yours, is at best possession of stolen property, or at worst, theft. Contracts are, I guess, by nature, ontologically, is also not just an agreement, but it's also an acknowledgement of property that is transferred in between two parties. And there's agreement that, yes, the property is being transferred. Therefore, if a contract specifies that a piece of property is transferred on a certain date, the property is thus transferred, be it a house, be it a car, be it money. Therefore, if the former owner, the breach of the contract, refuses to relinquish their property, including any fines or interest which was specified in the contract, and they don't do it, they are holding on to property which is no longer theirs, and therefore they are stealing, or they're holding on to stolen property. My last argument would be that is actually coming from a very different angle from the first two. That's more from a sociological angle. That what's the difference between debt collection and theft? And it seems that if contracts and fulfilling contracts are a violation of non-aggression, the non-aggression principle, that if you take property from someone, you're a thief, you're stealing from someone. Debt collectors aren't often seen as greedy or wicked, but they're still held as honorable, and they aren't declared outlaws. Thieves, absolutely not. They have no safe haven, and when no honest, honorable person will call a thief good, for lack of a better term. And debt collection and contract enforcement in general allows certain people, contract holders and their agents, to act against others without being considered outlawed themselves. And those are kind of like my three broad arguments.
That sounds good.
So, yeah, tackle them however we want to, or
Different
falls in your
parts kind of jumped out to me. I took notes because I tend to get sidetracked. So I'm like, okay, I got my notes ready to go. Let's take them just in order, 1, 2, 3, and see what comes out of this discussion.
I dig it.
So from the perspective of, agreements are voluntary, and then if it's a voluntarily agreed thing, then following through on it shouldn't be a violation of the non-aggression principle.
Yeah.
I like your example of, I tell my wife, punch me in the face, and she goes, okay. And then I can't be like, oh, well, you aggressed against me because I asked for it.
Yeah.
The only difficulty I find with that is kind of a general morality standpoint or I guess it's not even morality, it's a metaphysical issue where if we're looking at it from the angle of what is actually possible, would it be possible for me to sell myself into slavery, for example?
Mm-hmm.
And I could sign a document that says, oh, I'll be a slave, and maybe there's some benefit that I get out of that. For instance, my children get to keep whatever land they would have inherited from me, or there might be some sort of annuity paid out to my family. So I'm technically not a slave because somebody's getting paid, but at the same time, I get to go work for somebody and not see a cent of my work paid out to me.
I was actually thinking about that while constructing all these, and because of honestly, the slavery issue, I try to avoid that. I try to avoid even labor, because it does get iffy. That yes, it seems logical that you can sell your labor, but it doesn't really seem right to sell all your labor for one lump sum in the beginning. But then again, that seems like morally abhorrent to me, or more abhorrent to most people. But then again, in reality, people do sell themselves into slavery. And that does seem like a general morality thing, which is why, I just use that particular instance as, telling your wife to punch you in the face, or, break out the whips, or if it's a more mundane example, you entering into a boxing match as a prize fighter. I use that just to kind of differentiate between aggression and non-aggression rather than contracts, because it is really iffy and morally abhorrent. So I'm just trying to prove the basics of contracts as far as it goes with property, rather than infringing on the human dignity, for lack of a better phrase.
Okay. And that makes sense until a certain point where I would argue that, for instance, labor is simply the use of one's body.
Yeah.
And so if I'm selling certain property, for instance, my face, I'm leasing out my face to someone so they can put their fist into it, punch me in the face. It's a contract. At the same time, I could lease out my entire body's work to produce whatever thing I'm producing through my slavery. But at the same time, there would be a delineation between the labor that I'm producing, where I'm farming and doing whatever, in the example of most forms of slavery, and the sort of corvée slavery that we face, where it's like, oh, well, now you have to live in this barracks, and you have to work these times, and when you're not working these times, you have to do these things. I was just wondering if there was any delineation there for you.
I really don't know. I don't have that much prepared for that in this case. It's really hard to talk about slavery because we live in a modern enlightened times, rather than most of human existence, where slavery was ordinary and accepted. So it's really hard to talk about it in a rational manner without sounding like a terrible human being or a racist.
I'm no stranger to sounding like a racist, but at the same time, I would argue that it's not necessarily the case that slavery is so far into the past, given that in a recent blog post, I drew a direct comparison between just modern taxation schemes and corvée slavery in the South or in Haiti or in something like that. I believe you're familiar with that post.
I read it, but it doesn't pop into my mind right now.
Okay, and that's fine. Basically, the idea behind it was that the defining characteristic of slavery is the lack of direct ownership over one's person or the product of one's labor. Where, unlike a Marxist, I'm not going to say, well, if you work for wages, you're a slave. But I am going to say that if you work for wages and then somebody violently takes a percentage of that wage, whether it be 1% or 100%, what that is it's a perfect example of a parallel to corvée labor, where in the Deep South, slaves were able to work their own farms on their own time and produce their own food. But at the same time, they had to produce a certain quota for their owner at the same time. And so I see no real metaphysical difference between the corvée slavery of the South in America and modern taxation schemes, other than superficial differences like the whips and the chains and the boats and all of that kind of thing.
No, I follow that, but more. Well, I guess this is something that might be pertinent to this conversation. That recent, I guess, economic development is, I think it's called it's a newish way to fund secondary education, where companies are investing in students, paying for their education, but instead of doing the traditional student loans, we're going to get a percentage of your future earnings for the next 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah, it's buying shares in students.
Yes. Typically, it's only the cut only begins at a certain amount, usually $18,000 or $30,000, and the terms are, well, depends on what they think the potential of the student is. So, like, they're not interested in students in social services, but they are interested in students that are going to the sciences and computer science especially.
Yeah, the STEM fields.
The STEM fields, yes. So I thought that was like really interesting, and a lot of people were having complained about it and says, oh, it's modern slavery. And the argument was that why it wasn't is that they're not telling them what to do, that they could totally lose their investment, and the investments are legally bound to, a couple of years. So it's more of a legalized indentured servitude ish.
Yeah, that's actually precisely what it sounds like. To be honest, I have less of an issue with indentured servitude than I do with slavery or taxation.
But I don't see that to be any different from either a loan or from buying shares in a person. And there's been legal issues over whether or not it can be discharged in bankruptcy or not, because you can discharge a loan, you can't discharge ownership.
Exactly.
So like that hasn't come up in the U.S. Supreme Court or anything, but it is pertinent to like this conversation where, hey, this is something that is happening now.
Exactly.
Like,
honestly, I have a bigger issue with bankruptcy than I do with contracts, because bankruptcy seems to be a meta layer built on top of contracts, where bankruptcy is a result of debt, and then on top of that you have, debt is a contractual obligation more or less, and then you have
that's exactly what that is.
On top of debt.
That is exactly a contractual obligation.
So, as far as the voluntary aspect of contracts goes, I honestly don't see much wrong with the idea of selling shares of yourself in my education or whatever, as far as giving dividends on that investment.
And of course, by yourself, you mean, I presume that by yourself you mean future earnings rather than my kidneys.
Honestly, I don't see much of a delineation there. If I say I'll give you my kidneys tomorrow and you give me $150,000 tomorrow, or I say, well, you give me a college degree tomorrow and I'll give you dividends for such and such many years if there are dividends, that seems like more or less the same thing. I'm exchanging property for money at a future time based on an obligation that we've accrued between the two of us, or an agreement that we've agreed upon between the two of us.
Well, I guess maybe not. I guess it's part metaphysical, auctioning off your will, like your will, you're inselecting and auctioning off your intellectual will, and also the possible problem of, hey, if you actually do seriously sell shares in yourself, what happens if you lose control and interest over your own self? Then
Exactly.
it's like okay, that mean it's like that's like a question. It's like, oh, you. All your friends in our text conversations, they say, hey, we're going to buy shares in Joey Sikowski. And all together we own, 66%, super majority. Great. Okay, let's have him buy an expensive life insurance policy. And, guess what? He's going to be driving a motorcycle around all the time. And, guess what? You don't really need those kidneys and a half a liver and, blood and sperm. Okay, we're auctioning all this stuff off, and then sooner or later you die, and it's like, oh, great, life insurance policy cashed out, made a huge liquidation profit.
It sounds like an awesome '90s movie starring like Keanu Reeves or Liam Neeson.
Okay, write this down. Oh man, I shouldn't have said this on the podcast. Script. Someone else is gonna take our idea.
That's a movie script right there. I think they've already kind of done that with Repo Man, I think is what it was called.
I didn't see it.
Artificial kidneys and stuff, and then they had to pay loans basically on their kidneys, and if they didn't make it, people just come and rip out their artificial kidneys. But anyway.
Oh no, that's totally
Yeah, it's the same idea. It's not quite as cool as our script.
Yeah.
So, I guess to kind of bring it back to the initial point of whether or not contracts are bullshit, we're discussing these finer details of contracts, and we're largely in agreement again.
Yeah.
The point of departure, I think, as far as the voluntary nature of the agreements, what I was kind of driving at with the selling shares of myself based on my college degree and things like that, would be if that becomes institutionalized to the point that is inescapable, that's where it loses its voluntary quality. Where, for instance, if I don't have dividends, I go to college, I get my STEM degree, and then I realize that I don't want to do this, and I, don't pursue a job, I start collecting welfare, whatever. Either we have to write into the contract that this company has the ability to come after me and take things that I don't have from me somehow, or the contract is just invalidated, or it's still valid, but there just aren't any dividends on their investment in me, and so they don't get any dividends.
Again, that's the difference between investment and debt. Difference between ownership and a contract. That a contract can be enforced in a sense, but ownership, a contract and debt, it kind of narrows your return on investments. It bottoms out hypothetically at it bottoms out at zero if there's bankruptcy. But in reality, it bombs out at your principal. You're going to get your principal back plus whatever interest, but also peaks out at that. You're not going to, if it's an agreement for 7% off principal, you're never going to get 10% unless it's a weird, debt. It's a weird bond. But stock, you can become liable because you're owner. You're partially liable, but the upside is, hypothetically infinite.
Hypothetically. Okay. So I've got kind of two questions and they're radically divergent from each other. The first one then is, if the only way to get an education is to go through this process of, I don't know what to call it, indentured servitude loans or something like that.
That seems like kind of a biased way of phrasing it.
Well, again, I said I have very little issue with indentured servitude in all reality. So
let's call it a joint business adventure.
Okay, we'll call it a joint business venture student loan. So the joint business venture student loan looks great until we decide that based on the laws, the violence of the state decrees that this is pretty much the only way to get a degree, and you can't go somewhere else and get a degree and come back, and without a degree you're not licensed to do your job, and all of these different things that we see emerging in modern society.
Okay.
At what point is it no longer a voluntary agreement, even though I signed the contract and I'm like, oh well, yeah, I agreed to this thing? It's either that or flipping burgers for the rest of my life.
Well, one, I guess it stops being voluntary once some sort of institution forces you to do it, not just your personal assent and agreement. Yeah, I guess that'll be my answer to that. If it's you're in a shitty world, well, it's kind of like I have a lot of problems with, for lack of a better term, millennials complaining that, oh, the world isn't as great as it used to be. And my attitude is, no, it's much better than this. Like, in an absolute sense, we are better off than our grandparents were. We can't afford cars. You might not be able to afford a house or an education as easy as they do, but in an absolute sense, we all have refrigerators. Even the poorest people have refrigerators in their house, and that's huge. The poorest person now is richer than the greatest Roman emperor in that sense. We have electricity and smartphones, and these aren't like uncommon things. So it's kind of weird to say that, oh, it's contracts are involuntary and lends itself to the violence of the state and lends us to slavery and servitude, when that is literally a 1%er problem. And 1%er problem in the absolute sense of we are in the top. If you live in the United States of America, you're in the top 1% in the world. And if you, we're definitely in the top, 1% in history, certainly, because we have these things available. If you're listening to this right now, that means you have electricity and some sort of listening device. So you're in the top 1%. So it's kind of weird to say this is slavery when it's like, no, you're doing pretty great. You're just paying more than what you think is right.
To a certain degree, I actually agree with you again. You're absolutely right. And I've made this argument before where we're the best off that anybody has ever been. The kings of 150 years ago would have murdered all of their citizens to have air conditioning or a smartphone or a refrigerator, to have them all together in addition to automobiles and GPS and the internet and whatever else, would just totally blow their mind.
I'm in Delaware, you're in Colorado, this is crazy.
Agreed. At the same time, though, we have this drastically improved quality of life, materially speaking. Yeah. But I don't know if on any sort of deeper, more existential level, we have had any improvement or even managed to maintain the status quo. I'm doing my best to not sound like one of those whiny millennials, I don't feel like I'm compelled to really do my job and stuff because whatever. That's growing up. I understand that. You sell little bits of yourself all the time, and that's how you get ahead in life. That makes perfect sense. At the same time, there is a certain degree to which the acceptance of that reality diminishes your opportunity for greatness. Alexander the Great didn't go, oh, I got these student loans and a job I don't like. Alexander the Great went, I'm going to go conquer the world.
The problem with that is that Alexander the Great is literally one of the peak humans in history. He is unusual, but we don't read about, the tens of thousands of soldiers that served under him who was in the phalanx, and their job is that, okay, we're going to stay in this box and we're going to be surrounded by sweaty guys, and we're going to walk from here in Macedonia. We're going to go down to Greece, come back up, and walk all the way to India, and we're not going to see home like ever again. And all our job is we have no control over what happens. All we can do is hold our pike and walk forward. And I can't do anything but that because I'm stuck in this phalanx formation. I'm screwed. So
that's fair enough. I mean,
not to mention that's a leisure. Not to mention he has leisure. Like, yeah, he grew up with one of the greatest minds in ancient history, Aristotle.
Yeah, he's proof that if you're raised by a communist, you can still turn out okay.
Yeah, pretty much. I wouldn't call Aristotle a communist. I'll call Plato a communist.
Oh, Plato was even worse, but Aristotle didn't manage to escape. Anyway, so with regards to contracts being voluntary, then I think that more or less assuages my first question, which is, as long as you're not forced into the contract by whatever external means.
If you're not pushed into it by violence, then violence, extortion, threats, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right, and most people would argue that just invalidates the contract, that it's not a valid contract because you're under duress. Unfortunately, people don't really look at that way with real contracts these days, but I understand where that argument is coming from on a theoretical level.
Yeah.
So then the second question where that radically diverges is what happens if I decide not to uphold my contract? So I voluntarily assent to it today. Now a year passes and I'm a different person than I was a year ago. And I go, yeah, I've decided that I'm not the kind of the person that would have upheld this contract. I'll see you later.
Okay.
What on a practical level happens at that point?
Okay. Well, I'm not a lawyer. There's my disclaimer. And that's one reason why I kind of left out the human body out of a lot of things. Out of my main arguments. So this feeds into my second argument that contracts are primarily has to do with property. Hypothetical situation. You tell me.
I'm sorry. I think you dropped off the call for a second there. I think you're back now.
Okay, cool. Okay, let's say there's a contract between me and you. You decide to sell me your house. I said, okay, that's a great job. I'm going to pay you $1 million for this house. I'm going to pay you now, sign the contract, and on the 30th of August, the house will now then be mine. That's the deal. Okay, I give you the money. Sign the contract, yada, yada, yada. 30th of August comes around, and I'm like, oh, I'm ready to walk inside. And you're like, no, I'm not giving you the keys. All my stuff's here. My family's here. You're also well. Now, what happens? From a, I guess almost a metaphysical standpoint, that house is mine.
I would have to agree with that.
Yeah, like we say, like, we made an agreement in the very basic sense of this is what truth is. We are both the interested parties in this particular truth. And the truth is this day, this property is no longer mine and it is yours. And in return, I'm receiving this money. So in that sense, so with that in mind, I would say you have either stolen my property or you're holding on to property which is not yours. You're holding on to stolen property. It's one of those two things. And we can get into the whole, where does holding on to stolen property relate to the NAP? But I don't want to get into that. Because that is a deep rabbit hole, I'm sure. Because I was thinking, okay, the Bible says this, the law says this, English jurisprudence going back before the Magna Carta. No, I'm not prepared for that conversation. But I would say that you holding on to stolen property or definitely stealing property from me, in this case a house, I could go in and throw you out because this is my house.
Yeah.
The law says otherwise. You have to, if that happens in real life, you have to go through an eviction process.
Yeah, it's the physical removal principle, the corollary to the non-aggression principle.
Mm-hmm. So now, most contracts, and some, at least in some states, all contracts, they have to have some sort of exchange of value, which is why you'll see a lot of $1 contracts out there.
Mm-hmm.
So you made in your blog post the example of Alfred and Bruce signing non-disclosure agreements.
Yes.
Bruce has some sensitive secrets which he doesn't want to get out there, but he wants to employ Alfred. Alfred agrees to sign non-disclosure agreements. Now, okay, we'll say that one day Alfred quits and he blabs everyone his terrible family secrets. One big one in particular. Now, what happens? Well, as far as I know, I never heard of anyone going to jail over just violating non-disclosure agreements. Most, if not all, non-disclosure agreements have not gag orders, Joey, by the government. I'm talking about private. I saw that look.
I was waiting for my
saw that
to bring out Edward Snowden.
No, that is government. That is law. That is government. That's different from voluntary agreements. So
okay.
that, yeah. Hey, Alexa.
As the wife of Mad Philosopher. So I really like the mansion example. I really want to jump back to the mansion example really quick.
Okay, do that, and then we'll head on.
With the mansion example, so we agree, you pay me $1 million now, and on August 30th, the house becomes yours. And we agree to that, we sign it, and it becomes a metaphysical reality that on August 30th, the right of ownership passes on to you. I may have all the more superficial qualities of ownership. I have access to control over the ability to defend said mansion, but at the same time, the rightful ownership, which is, part of that 4-part clause for property, has now moved over to you. So we have a conflict on our hands.
Yes.
So if over the course of that month between today and August 30th, I knock out all of the walls on the first floor and turn it into a gymnastics studio, or if I fill the basement with water and piranhas and angry alligators, or if I burn the entire house to the ground August 29th, August 30th, the house does not exist as it did when we made the agreement. That house no longer exists, period.
That's true.
At what point does that metaphysical obligation of ownership transfer over? For instance, I can't give you a mansion because I don't have a mansion anymore.
Well, the obvious answer to that is that most contracts, especially housing contracts, have clauses saying it is in the proper condition as stated in here with these exceptions. There's inspection clauses and such. Like, these are normal things that you have in like an ordinary housing contract, which is why, and housing contracts are long and they have lawyers because they're very, very specific. So that'll be my answer to that, if you have a contract that doesn't specify the house is supposed to be in a certain condition, well, one, you're a dumbass, and you're just being foolish for not having that, and the other person might be immoral and wrong, but he is fulfilling the agreements, and obviously, you two did not have the same agreement in mind. Otherwise, you would have specified it.
Okay. The question I have to ask then, sorry, I was trying to look up my definition of property to make sure I got it right. But the question I have is, if you're able to exercise control over the mansion between when we sign the agreement today and August 30th, when you take ownership of the mansion, who does it actually belong to if you're able to exercise direct control over it via a contract?
Like me as the buyer?
Yeah.
buyer who has control over the mansion beforehand.
Yeah.
It still belongs to you, but you've leased out. Yeah, you leased out the property to me, essentially. Uh, I mean, the specific contracts can go into like what you can and cannot do during that time, but yeah.
Okay. I mean, the reason why I'm asking is now I've got it pulled up in front of me. My
Mhm.
working definition for property is any discrete object to which one has access, control over, and a legitimate claim by virtue of homestead or acquisition from the previous owner with the owner's assent.
Okay.
So in that context, we kind of do land in a gray area as far as the nitty gritty goes about, yeah, I'm kind of leasing it to you or you're kind of leasing it to me. It's kind of hard to figure
Well,
out
yeah,
where exactly in between now and August.
it depends on the exact wording of it all. That it could just could be you can. It depends on what you mean by access. If it's complete access, then yeah, I would say that's a lease. If I was to put a semantical word, use semantics, but yeah, but a lease is an ownership. Ownership requires, yeah, transfer, and there's no transfer. There's allowance and rights being given over a certain period of time. But yeah, that's a lease. That's a lease. That's not ownership.
Okay. So in this case, we have a piece of property that we've both agreed to. A exists. B is currently under my possession legally or whatever, legitimately, we should say. And that is a metaphysical possibility to transfer ownership of property between individuals via contract. So I can agree to all that. But let's change the example just a little bit and see what we can tease out of this, because the next one is, so instead of exchanging money for a house right now, exchange money for money over time. So, I take out a loan, right? You give me $1,000 today, and we agree, with interest, I'll pay you at the end of the year, I'll pay you $1,100, right? As 10% interest over the next 6 months or whatever. So it's a great deal for you. Or I guess that's 1%, whatever it is, right? 10%. So you give me $1,000 today. This is my money. I can do whatever I want with it, right? Because I took out the loan. It's my money.
It's your money.
Spend it as I see fit. So I take that $1,000 and I go and buy a giant box of ammunition. And I spend every single round of that ammunition between now and the end of the year. So that money is gone.
Yeah.
It's disappeared. Now, I took out the loan based on the idea that I got a certain paycheck and I could save up the money to pay you later. And you gave me the loan under that pretense as well. You're like, well, how much do you make in a year? How much do you spend in a year? Yeah, this seems like a good agreement. What's your credit score? It's okay. We'll make this deal. But then at the end of the year, something has happened. I've become unemployed. It turns out I spent that entire box of ammunition directed at a police station. And so now I'm in prison or something. And now that money that I should have been able to pay you simply doesn't exist. I don't own $1,100. So we can't metaphysically alter the ownership of the money because it simply doesn't exist. And there was no lease agreement that says you're not allowed to spend that $1,000 because there would be no reason to loan it to me at that point.
Okay.
So what happens then at the end of that agreement?
Okay, well, again, it depends on the agreement. And there's two basic types of loans, as I'm sure most people know. There's secured loans and unsecured loans. Secure loans saying like, okay, if you don't pay me back, I'm going to get your house or get your car or get whatever you left at the pawn shop. And then there's unsecured loans, which are more risky and they have higher interest rates, and the market determines that because reasons like what you said.
Well, it should anyway.
It should. I mean, a payday loan is more expensive than a pawn shop loan.
Yes.
Because it's, there's collateral involved.
Yep.
So in the case of an unsecured loan, well, any loan agreement should have specifics over to what extent can the lender go to recuperate their costs, to recuperate their loans, and you presumably agree to it if you're signing the dotted line. You read and you agree to all this. So it might be as far as they put a lien on your house. That's what That's what contractors do. It could be garnish your wages. It could be that they should have luck, or that they can sell to a collection agency who's going to bother you all the time, and that they're allowed to report this these bad choices.
Okay. So we can.
I mean, I never took out a payday loan, so I never actually looked at any paperwork for it. But I'm pretty sure it has something along these lines.
As far as I know, the legalism of it, I once considered and was turned down for what amounts to a payday loan. And as far as I could tell looking at it, the basic agreement was, and if you don't pay us back, we'll garnish your wages. And if you don't have wages, we'll send big scary men after you to take whatever they can find.
Yeah.
That's how loans have been serviced for forever.
Yeah. They've been, yeah.
I mean, being a capitalist, I'm not opposed to the idea of loans per se. Is more or less the matter of implementation for those loans. So what I want to do then is I want to drive at the point of either a lien or garnishment of wages, because they're essentially the same thing, where it's, we're going to take other property that you have that's not the property outlined in the contract as repayment for whatever it is we feel we're owed. And if violence is required, then violence will be used. I mean,
violence isn't required unless you decide to break the contract. Like, you could break the first provision of "I'll pay this back," and then you break the second provision. Well, that's
I will let you take my house, my car, my wages.
Yeah, it's like, I'm going to fight you now, and
right.
That's you escalating the situation. And I would say before that, as I said before, that you're voluntarily opening up your property and your future income to this, and you know that you're doing this,
right?
And you're like, I'm totally cool with putting up everything that I own, everything that I can own, open for collection. And I understand this, and I'm going to sign on this dotted line. So here you go. Right. Basically, related to the mansion example, it's literally no different, except instead of a discrete piece of property that you have, you're saying it could be any piece of discrete property that I have up to the agreed upon amount, which is the principal plus interest plus any fines and late fees. So you're saying, rather than limiting it to one single object or piece of property, you're more or less giving a blank check on Mad Philosopher. It's like, you can catch this on anything that I have.
Okay.
And you agree to it. So after this point, that they can say, here is the check which you owe me, and now this piece of discrete property, this part of the paycheck each month is metaphysically and legally mine.
Okay. So this is where the ontology part starts to come in handy, because the next question is, we've got this agreement where, if I don't pay you back, then I owe you this much. You can come and take it. Then like you said, I escalate the situation. So I'm going to say, nope, I don't have the $1,000. Sorry. Also, I'm not letting you take my car. If you do, I have this box of ammo right here, and I'm not afraid to use it. And so you're like, I've got a bigger box of ammo, and I don't actually have to be on the front lines. So I'm willing to expend my collector people's, I have life insurance policies on them or whatever, so it's no cost to me.
They know what they're getting into. So
whatever the dystopian anarcho-capitalist world we're existing in.
Dystopian? No, this is reality.
Oh no, I love it. It's just
tow truck operators. They carry peace on them.
Oh yeah, the smart ones do.
They're smart.
Yeah, I would not be a tow truck operator in Chicago or in Denver, but I would be a tow truck operator in, say, Wyoming.
Really? You want to steal the car of a redneck? Pass. Again, if you have all this ammo,
I'm legally allowed to carry a firearm in Wyoming, and I'm not legally allowed to carry a firearm in the Bronx. But
yeah.
So Anyway, tow truck owners aside, what I'm looking at then is the contract itself, the words written on the paper that I've signed and we've agreed to, and whatever metaphysical agreements we can make about, oh, well, if the property exists, then it reasonably changes hands and all of that kind of thing as far as a rightful ownership of property is concerned. At the end of the day, there's nothing about that written piece of paper or that signature on that piece of paper that prevents me from going, nope, I'm not paying, you can come and try to take it, but I'm going to do what I can to stop you. And then it escalates to the point that people are killing people over whatever. It doesn't matter the degree of material value that we're fighting over. And so when we're discussing the non-aggression principle, so when we're discussing the non-aggression principle, then the question is, at which point has aggression been introduced into the situation? The point where I sign a contract that says, if I don't do this, you can come and take my stuff. The point at which you say, or the point at which I say, I'm not doing this. The point at which you say, well, then I'm going to take your stuff. The point at which I say, well, you're not going to take my stuff. Or the point where people are dead. Where along that timeline does aggression take place?
I would say
I know somewhere along there we're going to agree that yes, aggression has taken place.
Yeah, something has taken place.
Point down that timeline.
I would say that aggression first happens when there's the true breach of contract, not the first initial breach of provision of you'll pay it back, but the provision that says, well, if clause A doesn't happen, then clause B, I'm going to take garnish your wages, and I'm going to take your car. And that's cool because contract's still in it and still happen, and you consented to that beforehand. And that is now metaphysically mine. You refuse to let go of that. That's when aggression occurs. When he says, no, I consented to this before, but no, I'm going to ignore your rightful ownership. I'm going to say this is mine, and you could pry it from my dead cold hands.
Okay.
I would say that's where aggression is. I would say that is theft.
Okay. I was going to say, so depending on your justification for that claim, I may agree with you. So you're going to argue that it's theft because I'm maintaining
or holding on to stolen property again.
Yeah, it's not necessarily holding on to stolen property so much as I have property that's not mine, and I'm not willing to give over that control and access to the person who does own it.
Yeah.
Okay, that's largely where my intuition lies as well. The issue then. I mean. So the issue then is escalation, where what we're looking at here is we have that clear point of demarcation where it's like, okay, well, this is technically theft now. And it's not because it's fraud. It's not because I lied or whatever. And it's not aggression because we had an agreement and I violated the agreement. And so I violated somebody. I'm not raping you by not fulfilling a contract.
No, you're stealing.
But what we're going to argue is that this is theft, not because I lied, but it's theft directly and causally because this is your property and I'm not letting you have it. Yes, exactly.
And that's where I was going with, well, yeah, go on.
And so then in the case of a lease where we have, in the case of a lease where, I have the mansion until the end of next month, but you're going to pay me now. And so we're kind of in this gray area where either I'm leasing the house to you or you're leasing it to me or, depending on the contract. That gray area of the property is something that we have to work out between the two of us, and the contract is a useful tool to delineate, well, am I allowed to knock out this wall or not? Am I allowed to have a weird smelly orgy in the master bedroom and the upholstery or not? That kind of thing. That all makes sense. And again, I'm largely in agreement with you. The issue I have as far as contracts on an ontological level then, introducing the contracts are bullshit argument just for the sake to have an argument in this otherwise largely amicable conversation.
This is why you like me so much.
Is it's one of the reasons anyway. Um, so
My good looks. That's the other reason, right?
of course, it's the rugged good looks. It's my inspiration to grow my facial hair out. And anyway, what I'm looking at with the contracts is at no point do I see the contract actually doing something in this discussion where, we make an agreement. So I've done something and you've done something and we're going to act based on that agreement.
Yeah.
And then even at the point where we're going to say some not imaginary, but some invisible metaphysical event occurs and the rightful ownership of the property switches from one person to another based on chronology and an agreement that was made in the past.
Yeah.
The contract doesn't seem to do that. The agreement that the contract is predicated on seems to do that. And so at that point, I'm going to say the contract itself has no impetus. It doesn't actually do something other than be paper and be ink.
Yeah. Well, one thing, you're looking at it from an ontology perspective, and you like to drop that word, and now I'm going to drop my word, teleology, that what is the end of this contract? The end is to put down this agreement to specify in a particular language, legalese, jurisprudence, whatever, a particular language, so that there is no confusion either now or in the future over what this means. And that's why you have professionals such as lawyers who go over these contracts. And to put it away for future reference put away future reference where we could both look at it, but we can't alter it.
Right.
And usually it's witnessed by someone who also has their own copy, usually a notary or something, some officer of the court, witness, what have you. And that is actually, it doesn't have impetus because it doesn't do anything. No, it does those things of it's useful. It's utilitarian. Like, contracts are not a metaphysical force. They are very physical. They're very down to earth. It's like saying, what does electricity really do? Like, it doesn't have impetus because it doesn't give us light. Well, light's useful. It's a useful thing. And the ability to reference agreement in the future, that again is something modern, which we have the benefit of. And when I mean modern, I don't even mean the classical sense of 50s or today. I don't mean contemporary. I don't mean the atomic age. I mean modern as in, written language, which only started about 10,000 years ago?
Approximately, depending on the culture you're looking at.
Yeah, one of the four cultures that came up with writing, the ability to reference language, this specific language, in the future, because is a very big deal. Because people's memories change, people forget things, people die, people tend to remember things for their own benefits, but the contract, the treaty, doesn't change. And in the course of human history, depending on how long you want to say first humans came around, 200,000 years ago, or I like to use 50,000 years ago, for most of our human existence, we have not had agreements where we could reference afterwards. But I think agreements have existed as long as we've had language.
Okay.
So there's that. And the other thing I mentioned before is that third argument, the sociological argument that we consider thieves who have no honor. There's a thief. You've advocated declaring people outlaws if they irrevocably offend a society or a population. Okay. And people won't, and no one will do business with them or defend them if something bad happens to them. Well, we don't treat debt collectors that way because society recognizes that they have a legitimate claim on this person's property. And if they go up and knock on their door or throw them out of their house or take their car and they're outside yelling, "Don't you take my car? Don't you? I have a busted leg. I gotta get to work, my mama." No, like we're like, no, like maybe it's a jerk move. Maybe you're not understanding, but we are not saying, "Hey, I should tackle this guy as a bystander. I shouldn't like beat him up." And like we don't think that. And the reason why is that we have an agreement that can be referenced by anyone at all. Okay. And it gives that kind of, it does give a sociological protection over it. And again, that's not there's not a lot of metaphysics involved, but contracts are metaphysical. They've existed shorter than humanity existed, shorter than our brains have existed, shorter than language have existed. Ever since there's been language, there's been agreements, but contracts are a new invention. Contracts are an invention, I should say.
Okay. The only issue I have with the sociological justification is there are a great many things that go on and nobody bats an eyelash that probably should have eyelashes bat at them.
Well, that's a bystander effect.
Yeah, I mean, I will agree that...
I'm not going into my human nature. I wrote my senior thesis on that, original sin and Milgram experiments.
Yep.
The theology majors didn't like it. The theology majors did not like it.
Of course they didn't, because they don't like experimental results.
Yeah, I'm like, sorry, man. Like, it turns out human beings are terrible, and I could prove it experimentally. Here you go. What does that tell us about the human soul, guys?
Yep.
Talking about John Paul II, new evangelization. Wrong. People are terrible.
New evangelization, sure. New evangelization means people aren't generally horrible things. That's not necessarily in there.
No, it's just everyone else is just so optimistic. I'm like, no,
yeah,
I'm bringing this down.
That's part of the reason I dropped out of that school, is I could not handle, the optimists were far too optimistic, and the pessimists, I had no idea why they were still alive. And having landed somewhere in the middle, more on the pessimistic side, I was like, yeah, I can't handle this culture. I'm out of here. That and the economics of getting a liberal arts degree. But
yeah.
So
it's a different time.
Yeah. So with the specific example of the repo man, and somebody leases a car, takes out a loan to purchase a car, and then they have to pay off the loan, or the car gets repossessed as collateral. Very few people intervene and save the car owner from the repo man who's just doing his job. And I would be inclined to be part of that crowd that does nothing and maybe even records it just in case something exciting happens. I could put it on YouTube and get a bunch of hits and feel good about myself.
Good deal.
However, that justification itself, I don't think does anything more than show a general proof of concept where you play on my specific intuitions and say, oh, well, you wouldn't stop this from happening, would you? Well, that's a contract, so therefore the contract has some form of impetus. That's an okay argument. But at the same time, a lot of people don't intervene when they see police officers beating homeless people to death on the side of the road. It's kind of like, well, that's something that maybe should be prevented. It's public property. He's part of the public, So I'm being told we have to be quieter so the baby doesn't fall asleep. I guess doesn't wake up.
Sorry, Mrs. Mad Philosopher.
James says, sorry, Mrs. Mad Philosopher. So, man, we're too agreeable here.
Come on.
The
Isn't that what's supposed to happen? I forget the name of the theorem. Something agreement theorem, that any two rational people must have must agree, and if they don't, they have different evidence, different priors. I'll look it up.
I was expecting to come into this with different priors, which I do still think we have, but it's mostly semantic. I'm gonna still stand by contracts are bullshit, but that's because people believe contracts have these magical powers that grant authority back and forth. I'm gonna say no, that's an agreement. What a contract is a piece of paper. So
well, you know that
I
wasn't what I thought about. You specifically wrote your definition of contract using the exact words I sent to you in the text message.
Yeah, pretty much.
So we sorted that out like in a text message. Like, all right.
No, yeah.
No, it's not it's not like contracts aren't magic. They're not metaphysical. Like I'm a electrician. I'm very down to earth. Dude. Yeah.
Okay. I thought I had one more point that I wanted to discuss with you. We have contracts and the non-aggression principle, which was very brief, briefer than expected, where it's,
Well, we figure out what contract, we know what contract is, we figure out what aggression is, and I'm like, okay, well, that's about it.
That up. Yeah. We went over the basics of property and how properties interact with agreements on a metaphysical basis, short discussion of sociology.
I mean, really, like, you do this a lot. And I noticed in your conversations I have with you and in your blog posts that you say that contracts are bullshit. You say broad stuff like that a lot, specifically to get into arguments.
Yeah.
One, to draw people out, and two, because you just like the intellectual masturbation. I know you do.
I mean, I'd consider it more an intellectual mosh pit, but yeah, that's an idea.
You do it for fun. It makes you feel good. You want to get.
I have a very particular character on Facebook, and I have to admit that I would not play that character on Facebook if it did not alleviate discomfort.
Yeah. So, you do it because you don't argue just for truth. You argue it because you like it. It's not even victory that you don't even care about victory. Like Plato, of all his mistakes, I think the most true thing he ever says that the soul has three parts. The part that loves truth, the part that loves pleasure, and the part that loves victory. You don't care about the victory. You care about truth. So you do care about truth, but you say stuff like contracts are bullshit because it makes you feel good.
I enjoy the intellectual skirmish that follows. Saying it itself doesn't do anything, it's just words. But then when it gets into this discussion, it's like, oh, okay, we're doing something now. We're arguing about something. We can come to a better understanding of reality by discussing whether or not contracts are bullshit.
Well, that's like saying, like, I don't take this bat and break this flower pot. Just that doesn't make me feel good. What makes me feel good is the people coming outside and yelling at me, why would you break the flower pot? And then we get into a discussion over global warming.
I'm going to have to do that now. I'm going to have to go smash somebody's...
No, don't do that. That is a violation of the non-aggression principle. Like, if you actually do that specific breaking person's flower pot.
It depends on whose flower pot it is, I guess. Maybe I smashed my neighbor's flower pot with permission.
You could go up. You could. Maybe this would be another block, but maybe you could put your own flower pot on someone else's stoop and smash it, and make it think that it's theirs. And then I don't know. Like, I think you'll probably have to clean it up afterwards. But I think that's pretty clear on the whole non-aggression thing.
It'd be like those bad YouTube videos where people are like, we're going to prank people. And then their prank is like, we're going to taser people in the park. Like, it's not a prank. It's just being a dick.
Yeah, taser people's being a dick. That's like that is like legally they could kill you.
Yep.
If you do that.
I probably would.
It's like, oh, I remember this one like prank gone wrong. And he dressed up, he threw a clown mask on. He's carrying around a fake shotgun or unloaded shotgun or something. Yeah. Like just being like spooky as all hell. And like there's like creepy music playing in the background too. Like he got that going on. And then he does it. He's like, oh, it's so fun, it's so fun. And then someone like pulls a gun. He's like running. Holy shit. He like pulls something out of his waistband and the guy freaks out. I'm like, yeah. Of course, you can, like, the person can kill you, and it's on video. They're not going to jail for this.
That should be our next conversation. At what point does a prank violate the non-aggression principle?
I don't know.
I mean, I've
Quick
seen the
answer:
video where-
depends on how much you like it.
yeah.
You-
I mean, it's
that requires foresight. You need to
yeah. That's
kinda
always
feel
been a
the
gray
room.
area for me because a lot of times, I mean, just with pranks in general, it is kind of, you know, they're good pranks, and good pranks catch you off guard, make you feel off, you know, weird and like I don't know what's going on. And then there's that cathartic release where it's like, oh, smile, you're on candid camera. You know, oh, okay, everything's fine. This is all just a bad joke. Okay, I get
Well,
it.
it's
now.
like, well, a question like that is, well, at what point is a prank aggression? And that's like asking, okay, at what point are you an asshole?
Yeah.
And there's not a solid line. Like, there's gray area. It depends on how if you do something to charm, that's different from me doing something to charm my wife. Like, you need foresight. You need to feel it out. And if you go overboard, then you need to apologize and make amends.
Yeah.
See, that's a podcast right there. I just saved you an hour.
There we go. Yeah, I mean, my favorite example of that, you know, prank gone wrong is there's a video took place in Japan, and they're basically staging like a Yakuza gangland style assassination, where like a guy runs away around the corner and then drops to his knees, is like begging for his life, and then there's, you know, like a cap gun, fake gunshots, and then so you only see the guy like play dead, then you never see the assailant because he's around the corner.
Yeah.
And somebody who's like an off-duty cop or whatever in Japan saw this happen and just immediately ran around the corner and unloaded into the guy pretending to be a Yakuza with a cap gun. And it's like, I don't think anywhere along that entire line the non-aggression principle was violated, but there's still a guy that's dead. Like that shouldn't be able to happen. But
really,
as far as I
like,
can tell,
I don't know, like it's just being, I don't know, that's prudence. Like you could be speeding, or you could just be, being a crappy driver is not a violation of the non-aggression principle.
Agreed.
You kill a lot of people that way.
Well,
So like non-aggression, like if everyone adopts the non-aggression principle in their person, it doesn't mean people are going to be dying because they don't do stupid things anymore.
Okay. I'm that's a good question. If I run somebody over with my car, but I'm like, I'm gonna murder this son of a bitch, am I violating the non-aggression principle? The only reason that becomes an issue for me is because like drunk driving arguments, right? I'm gonna be like, it's not a violation of the non-aggression principle to drunk drive. Otherwise, it would also be a violation of the non-aggression principle to drive well old, or drive well an Asian woman, or drive well a teenager. Like, and I don't think it's a violation of the non-aggression principle.
Not if you're a good driver. If you could, if you could be the greatest driver and have like blow alcohol over a certain limit. If you're like biologically unable to process alcohol in your brain, which messes it up, then yeah, like if you're biologically unable to, if you had two different circulatory systems in your body, one of which goes to your brain, alcohol doesn't get in there, then yeah, that's not a violation of the non-aggression principle. But if for every other moral human, when you drink, you make bad decisions, and you know that. Right. Everyone knows that. Everyone knows that, and people can swear that, oh, I'm fine. Well, no, people are stupid. They're very bad judges of themselves, and that's why, that's why, congressmen make laws and police officers enforce those laws, is because sometimes people are that stupid. And we can go into more. You can go into more and more of that, but that's why people made laws. Those laws are made in that particular sense, that people are stupid and they're bad judges of themselves.
That itself is a full other podcast.
That is.
Maybe we'll do that as a preview for our next discussion.
Oh, sweet.
I don't know.
Another conversation I'm fully qualified for.
Okay. Yeah, we could do that.
The political machinations of laws, such as anti-drunk driving laws.
Exactly.
What are the political motivations, James?
Yes.
I don't know. Control, people being stupid, mothers against drunk driving, like lobbying.
Yep. And what I was going to try to do is kind of dovetail these two conversations together, because I'm going to argue, well, there's no sort of common law justification for the existence of the government as it exists now. There's no contractual basis for government to exist now, and I don't really see any other argument that can justify that position. So then it's, well, people making laws about things like drunk driving, it's kind of like, well, whose road is it, and whose house is it, whose car is it, who's getting run over by the car, and those are all questions that we can discuss later.
Yeah, that is another discussion, such as, I'm surprised you bring common law into it as an anarchist. Like, I never heard an anarchist talk about common law, which is a thing, but it's surprising that you bring it up in the first place.
Right. And I kind of started broader and worked my way down. You know, you got common law, and then you've got contracts, and then you've got like the individual person's property, and those are all kind of varying levels of abstraction built off of that.
I'm glad that I didn't have to bring in common law, because I don't know it. And I'm like, okay, so where is the common law for contracts? Is it, is it from the English? Is it from the Anglo-Saxons? Is it from the Vikings and the Norse? Or is it from the Romans? Or is it from the Greeks or Phoenicians or the Egyptians? And it's like, okay, well, let's travel through Western civilization and figure this out. Hammurabi, there we go. Hammurabi and some other guy, the first ever treaty. I didn't have to do that. And it turned out we agree on everything once I explained it well enough.
Yeah. I mean, if you have good enough definitions and the right priors, there's no way to not come to the same conclusion.
Great.
There we go. Well, that was a not very argumentative argument. And I thank you for your time, James. It's a bummer that none of our other text group friends could come and sit in on this conversation.
Well, they've known me for a very long time. They know me in this particular context. And the unofficial slogan of my household is James is always right. So I'm glad that I could enlighten you.
Well, that's basically what I'm on a quest for. So I guess I should be thanking you. I'm glad I could help you with this. I'm not sure if either of us changed our mind on anything, but if we were in agreement to begin with, I don't know if changing our minds would have been a good idea.
Well, we could have another podcast over whether or not you changed your mind or not. Because I'm pretty sure I did change your mind about. Because you ended that last blog post between two options, and the second option was pretty much what I'm advocating for, but you weren't enthusiastic about it at all.
I was not enthusiastic about it. I still have questions. I'm still thinking things through. I'm still not enthusiastic about it, but as time has gone on, I've realized more and more that reality is the way it is, whether or not I like it. And more often than not, I don't like it until I can use it to my advantage. So, that's just the way it is.
All right.
So, well, thank you very much, James, and I will talk to you later.
Glad to be here. Thanks.
Carpe Veritas, and have a great week.